Could you take us through an example of a project that you did?
The most dramatic example that I can think of, which is the one that I've described in first chapter or the Habit 1 chapter of the most recent book. A few years ago, I was working in Canada, my home country. After many years of working elsewhere, I was working on a project with Indigenous people in the province of Manitoba, a project related to health care for Indigenous people in Manitoba. And it was a group of Indigenous leaders from across that sector, officials of health agencies and doctors and nurses and traditional leaders and others. When we got started, I was describing my global background, and one of the leaders said straight up to me in front of everybody, "I don't trust you," a man named George Moosewagon. Of course, I was shocked and a bit panicked, but I did understand within a few seconds what was going on, that this wasn't a personal thing. What he was saying was that we have, well, to put it in his words, as we discussed it later, we have a long history of people coming from outside telling us what to do. That really hasn't worked out for us over the centuries, especially white Canadians telling us they think they know what we ought to do. And this is a very bad start to our workshop. And this was very helpful to me because I was indeed thinking of myself as somebody from outside who was an expert and a consultant and a facilitator who wasn't really involved much in this situation and therefore was looking at it from outside and above. But I guess the deeper meaning of what he was saying is you're not outside, Adam. You are, in fact, in as much as you are a white Canadian settler, to use the terminology in Canada, then you're not apart from the problem, you're part of the problem. Or you're, to say it in more neutral terms, you're part of the system, you're not outside the system. And this was very helpful. And I did understand pretty quickly what was happening. And we took a break and we discussed it in our facilitation team, which included a number of, well, it was mostly first Indigenous facilitators. And we changed immediately and dramatically what we were doing to center Indigenous leadership and way of working and facilitating, and I in particular took a much more of a backseat role. So this is an example of we're trying to make a difference in the system, in this case the system that produces, or more accurately doesn't produce, healthcare for Indigenous people in the province of Manitoba. The system is showing up in the room. The roles are all there, or if you look carefully you can see all the roles that are there, and we can only be effective at changing the system if we change what we're doing. And in that particular case, if I could change what I was doing, which I did, and it worked very well. So that's one example that I can think of.
In some ways, you sort of mirrored the change, like
Yes.
for them to see that you were willing to set aside whatever frame that when you recognize you were also part of the system was a clear indication for them to see that they too can set aside something because now it was shifting.
Yes, I suppose. But the most important thing was, if I wanted to simplify, the dominant dynamic in the system of Indigenous people in Canada the last 100 or 200 years has been domination by white authorities or experts or colonialists, however you want to call it. And so I was stepping out of that role, or I was abandoning that role, and that allowed something else to happen.
Right.
And in particular, this group of people to find their own way forward with some modest support by me and my colleagues, but without me instructing them.
Yeah.
So I'm giving that as an example of the relationship between the system and the individual. In that case, we needed to change our relationship in order for the situation we were dealing with to be able to be transformed.
Like you said, to some extent, in that particular example, it's lucky, or at least that George was willing to say what he said up front, right? Versus keeping silent and holding it, and whatever happened just before he said that might have allowed for that, right? Yeah.
At least in my way of thinking about it, a testimony to his personal mastery. He could see that clearly, he could say it clearly, and say it in this is the most important thing, but say it, he wasn't angry, he was just stating a fact. And he stated, and because he said it with such clarity and calmness, I could hear it without defending myself and otherwise trying to shut it down. I can imagine in other circumstances I would have done.
Yeah.
And so we collectively, he, I, the other people in the meeting, the other facilitators, were able to quite quickly and easily shift. And as we shifted, the room shifted, and as the room shifted, the system was able to shift, because these people, the people in the room, were leaders of that system, and therefore could start to imagine and enact a different way for that system to be.